All right, I might as well dive right into it. Thank you to North Central for inviting me to do a presentation tonight. My name is Proctor. I am a nutritionist for a feed company here in the Midwest, working primarily with dairy cattle, but obviously Highlands are my passion. I have a herd of about 35 plus a few head of Highlands here at Windermere Farm in Junction City, Wisconsin. And today is a busy day. We are getting ready for the National Western Stock Show and packing, washing, all of that. And we also thought it would be a great idea to have our hardwood floors refinished at the same time we're gone. So we're clearing everything out of the downstairs of our house. Always, why not add a few more things? So we're going to jump into the meat of the presentation. We're going to talk about nutrition, and I'm going to share my thoughts as a nutritionist and Highland breeder on how we need to approach a nutrition program. And then we'll have time at the end. Kevin, is there a way for people to ask questions as we go or make notes in the chat or something?
Yep, so if you want to just throw those questions in the chat, we can answer them that way. And you'll probably see them pop up, you know, if something specific. But otherwise, we can go through them all at the end too.
That sounds great.
If you don't see one.
Okay, super. So we're going to talk tonight about nutrient requirements for animals, specifically cattle, and then how we meet those nutrient requirements. So a nutrient is just a substance that an animal needs to survive, grow, and reproduce. And some examples of those are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and all of us, whether we be people or cattle or microbes, we all need a balanced diet that meets our nutrient requirements. The ingredients are the way that we choose to provide those nutrients to animals. So when we're talking about beef cattle, primarily we're looking at forages, which are grasses, alfalfa, high fiber ingredients that have a low energy density and are fermented in the rumen. We also have grains available that are higher in carbohydrate and have a high energy density. Then a lot of people feed byproduct feeds, depending on what part of the country you're in and what's available to you. Wet brewer's grain is one that several Highland people I know use as part of their diet. And then of course we have supplements such as vitamins, minerals, and then feed additives, depending on what our animals are needing and how we want to get it to them. So nutrient requirements. The first priority is maintenance. That animal has an amount of protein, energy, vitamins, minerals that she needs just to maintain her body, keep her organs going, keep her cells regenerating, regulate her temperature, and manage her immune system. She then, depending on what stage of life she's in, she may have a requirement for growth. So a young animal has a requirement for growth that's above and beyond their maintenance requirement. A cow that's in lactation has a higher requirement because she's producing milk for that offspring. And at the same time, she's got to reproduce. So over on the right-hand side here, we've got a little diagram that shows she's going to put the first nutrients go to maintenance. The second priority is growth. Lactation comes after that. Then fetal development, breeding, and body reserves. So when we have an animal that's getting plenty of nutrients in her environment, she's going to meet her maintenance easily. She's going to use that to grow, maybe put weight on. If she's lactating, she'll have plenty of nutrients to provide that calf or grow the calf that's coming for the next season to get bred back. And if she's got nutrients left over at that point, she will put them on her back as body fat, body stores. If we're not meeting those requirements, she's going to maintain herself first. Growth will suffer In a younger animal, if we're not providing adequate nutrients, we're not going to see the growth that we expect. We're not going to see the milk production in a lactating animal. We may end up with calves that are small and not thrifty, and an animal that doesn't breed back. She will pull body reserves off her back as much as she is able to support these other functions. But if we're not meeting her needs, she's going backwards. And we want to be sure that we're not putting our animals in that situation. So in a beef cattle diet, dry matter intake is one of the most important things that we worry about. An animal has a certain amount of dry matter that she will eat based on her body size and her, whether she's lactating, growing, what her physiological status is. It's important that we recognize that dry matter intake is the feed without the water component. So if we're feeding silage, a silage might be 35% dry matter. So if we feed her 100 pounds of silage, we need to recognize that that's only 35 pounds of dry matter. And obviously that's a little more, I'm used to looking at dairy diets that way. But water does not provide any calories. So it's very important, but it doesn't contribute to her energy and protein requirements. So I run into this sometimes with people looking at fodder systems or looking at feeding silage. And if I need to feed her 20 pounds of hay and I'm feeding silage, then I'm going to need to feed her 60 pounds or 70 pounds of silage because of the water that's in that silage. If I'm growing fodder for her in one of those sprouting systems, a pound of wet fodder is very different than a pound of dry hay. So dry matter intake is a really critical thing to recognize, that all of our nutrients are presented in terms of dry matter, and how we choose to get those will affect how much wet feed we have to put in front of that animal. Crude protein is how we measure protein for beef cattle. TDN is total digestible nutrients. It's from a dairy nutritionist standpoint, I'd say it's a little bit of an outdated term, but it is still how we're looking at diets for beef cattle. Net energy is a little more specific than TDN to break down that energy component into the efficiency that's used for maintenance, lactation, and growth. Calcium, obviously, for bones, phosphorus for bone growth, and we're not going to get deep into vitamin and mineral requirements, but there are specific requirements for each of the vitamins and minerals that are essential in the cow's diet. And those are things you can find online. There are lots of tables available if you want to get into that level of detail. So what affects nutrient requirements? We've got pictures of several different animals here in several different environmental conditions and different stages of life. On the top, we've got the black cow. She's obviously a lactating animal with a fairly young calf at her side. Her nutrient requirements are going to be highest of anybody in this group of pictures. In the middle here, we've got a cow with a little older calf. That calf is old enough that it's consuming dry feed on its own. It's eating hay, it's eating grass. So that's taking some of the pressure off this cow to support her. Clearly, the cow still has a requirement for milk production and reproduction, but that calf is helping support itself. Down here, we've got a growing heifer, but out in the winter months. When the weather is cold, the nutrient requirements are higher because that animal needs to keep herself warm, and she uses nutrients to do that. And then down in the bottom corner, it's blocked on my screen, but it's a little black heifer, I believe, in the growing phase of life. So she's going to have nutrient requirements to enable her to grow probably 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds a day, depending on what my goals would be for her. So the age of the animal, mostly from a standpoint of, is it a young growing animal or is it a mature animal? Size of the animal, this cow here is about a 1,200 pound cow. her requirements are going to be less than a 1,400-pound cow, because that 1,400-pound cow has more body mass that she needs to maintain. Exercise is an important one. If we've got animals that are in a small pasture standing around the hay feeder, they're not using a lot of energy for exercise. But if we've got animals that are traveling long distances to find forage, those animals are using quite a bit of energy to get to the feed. Stage of lactation, how old is that calf? What percent of the calf's nutrients is the cow providing? And how good of a milk production animal is that cow? The ones that grow really good big calves have a higher, are lactating, probably higher milk production, higher nutrient requirements for that animal, but she's paying you back by putting that into the calf. And then we talked about temperature. In the cold, like it is here in Wisconsin right now, these animals are going to eat more. They have a higher energy requirement just because of the temperature. The same happens in the summer with heat stress. Their requirements actually go up during heat stress, and dry matter intake tends to go down. So that can be a challenge for animals as well, especially our Highlands. This is an example of a table that gives you numbers to put together with the same concepts that we've been talking about. This dry cow, early to mid gestation, the percent TDN, total digestible nutrients that she needs, is about 48 to 52. You'll see that's the lowest of any animal on this chart. She's not working very hard. That fetus inside is not using a lot of energy. So her nutrient requirements are fairly low. Later in gestation, though, we've got a growing calf inside that dry cow. So we've got to provide more total nutrients, higher protein requirement for that animal. Once she drops a calf and she's lactating, we go from a 48 to 52 TDN up here to a 60 to 65 TDN. So a fairly significant jump in the nutrients that she needs. Same with the protein requirement. She's supporting a calf, making milk. That milk contains a lot of protein, so her requirements are up. The backgrounding would be for calves, growing calves. And depending on what growth rate you were expecting or wanting to have in your calf will determine how much TDN you need to provide. So if you're looking for a calf to grow 1.5 pounds per day, a TDN of 63 would be adequate. If you're wanting that calf to grow at 2.5 pounds a day, she or he is going to need a diet of 74 TDN. So this is something I think a lot of Highland people don't understand when they're just starting to think about nutrition. But the more nutrients you put into an animal, the faster it grows. You know, we talk about Highlands being slow growing, but part of it is also how we choose to feed them. So if we put more nutrients into that animal, it's going to grow faster. If we withhold nutrients, we're going to slow down the growth rate. And then if we've got that animal on a finishing diet where we're wanting to put down condition and actually finish a carcass, we need a TDN of about 80 and more energy than we do protein on that animal. I'm going to skip over this one. It really says the same thing with a few, just some different breakouts, looking at a production cow versus the other table that had younger animals included as well. So how do we manage animal requirements? And this is sometimes difficult with Highlands because our herds tend to be smaller. In an ideal world, we would break up our herd into at least 4 groups. We would have gestating cows, so the ones that are growing a calf, in their own group where we can feed them appropriately. We'd have our cow-calf pairs where we can bump up the energy and protein for them. Our growing steers, it would be nice if we could raise them separately or separate them and feed them to meet their nutrient requirements based on the growth that we need to get them to finish size when we expect to. And then our weaned calves, those little ones after they're weaned are not as efficient, not as able to get their nutrients out of the forages alone. And sometimes they need a little help with some concentrate feed as well. And I recognize that that's not always something that we can do with herds of Highlands. So in my herd, the way I manage that, I am able to do a little bit of grouping, but not as much as I'd like. So I end up matching the feeding program to the animals with the highest requirements in that group. And the result is I do have some animals that are a little heavier than they need to be in this herd, but I take that as the lesser evil. I'd rather have a few that put a little extra weight on than I would have calves that aren't getting the nutrients that they need to thrive. And getting nutrient requirements is something you can do fairly simply with an online search. You'll need to know the size of your animal, the physiological status that it is, the winter summer thing, but there are lots of tables available if you spend a little time just Googling that. So we've talked about requirements, and now we're going to move into how do we provide those nutrients that she needs. And cows are amazing in that they have a rumen inside them. And I'm sure everybody knows the rumen is a 4-chambered stomach. It contains the rumen and the reticulum, which are the big front ends of the fermentation vat. The omasum is essentially a filter that keeps the big particles in the front of the rumen and allows the smaller particles and the liquids to pass through into the abomasum, which is this part here. And that's much more like a true stomach. The pH is very low here. In the rumen and reticulum, the pH is just slightly acidic, but here in the abomasum, it's very acidic. So this would be similar to our stomach. This portion would all be the rumen portion, ruminant animal portion. And then, of course, we have the small intestine and the large intestine. What's amazing about the rumen is that it enables that animal to get nutrients out of feed that we could not eat. Only ruminants can get a lot of nutrients out of fiber. And the way they do that is because there's a huge population of bacteria that live in this rumen, and they're actually doing the work for the cow. So we put forage into that rumen, the microbes go to work on it, and they produce volatile fatty acids. That's the energy source for the cow. They also produce protein. They use a little bit of the protein or some of the protein that comes in with the feeds. But as those bacteria are washed out through the omasum into the abomasum and down through the digestive tract, they're digested and they provide an excellent source of protein for the cow. So the nutrients that are presented to the animal after the ruminal fermentation are very different than those that enter the rumen. And we really, as we think about cow nutrition, we need to recognize that we're feeding a fermentation vat over here, and the products of that fermentation vat are what's feeding the cow. That's very different from people, pigs, dogs, where we put feed directly into the digestive tract of the animal, and the nutrients we put in are the nutrients that are available to the monogastric. In a ruminant, the nutrients we put in here are changed before they get to the cow. So that's why she can digest fiber and we can't, because the microbes are doing that work. Likewise, a lot of times I hear people say, cows should only eat forage. Cows should not eat grains. And the beauty of the rumen is that it enables a cow to get nutrients out of forage, but it does not prevent her from also getting nutrients from grains. There is definitely a place, a role that more concentrated feedstuffs can play in a ruminant diet. So I may make a few people uncomfortable here, but I'm going to say that the grass-fed versus grain-fed is not because we have a ruminant. That's a choice that we make in how we want to feed our animal. Both systems can work for a ruminant. They are amazing because of this adaptation that enables them to eat forage, but it does not prevent them from properly digesting other types of ingredients. So when we look at what happens to these ingredients when we put them in a rumen, I'm using an example here of a diet that's 80% hay, 10% soybean meal. Soybean meal is a product of soybean processing. It's very commonly used as a protein source in animal diets. Good source of protein, good source of energy. And then barley is a grain that is also an excellent source of starch and some protein. So we put these ingredients in. The cellulose part of the hay is going to be fermented in the rumen to acetic, propionic, and butyric acid. Those acids provide energy for the cow. The proteins are going to either pass through as bypass protein, or they're going to be used by the rumen microbes, and those microbes are going to pass through as microbial protein. Fats don't get digested in the rumen, so they pass through for the most part, and those provide fatty acids, excellent energy source for the animal, and those are digested further down the digestive tract. And then starches and sugars. The rumen microbes love starch and sugar, and they're very easily fermented sources of energy, so they ferment those to the same fatty acids, but in different proportions as the forages. So the animal is going to take this diet we provide her, feed the rumen microbes, and those rumen microbes are then going to feed the cow for us. So some differences between Mono Gastrics, like humans, and ruminants, like cows, are that humans, we use glucose for energy. A cow uses the rumen to turn fiber into volatile fatty acids for that cow. We digest starches, sugars, and fats for energy directly. The cow uses the fermentation end products of the starches and the sugars for energy. And then the fats, rumen microbes don't digest fats very well, so those mostly end up available in the similar form to how we put them in. There are some exceptions there, but we won't get into that. We need very high quality protein sources. The cow also needs high quality protein, but she gets more than half of that from the protein that really is the rumen microbes as they pass out of her system. We don't digest fiber very well. We can handle a little bit of it, but not very much. The cow digests fiber in huge quantities. You know, the vast majority of her diet is going to be fiber, and the rumen is going to turn that into energy and protein sources for her. So our job as caretakers of these animals is to select ingredients that provide the right nutrients to meet that animal's nutrient requirement and enable her to thrive in our environment. When we look at forages, we have differences in quality and quantity depending on when we harvest that feed. So this is a table that I like because it explains fairly simply the differences, or what happens to the quality of feed as it grows, or forage, grass, alfalfa. The early vegetative stage, our yield when we harvest is quite low, but our quality is extremely high. As the forage matures, going this direction on the graph, the yield increases, but the quality decreases. So when we're selecting hay or harvesting our own hay, we want to find hay that's somewhere in this middle section. where the yield is good, but we haven't lost the quality at that point. So growing conditions affect that, varieties of forages that you're using. Harvest date is the one that we can control the most. You know, we choose, weather permitting, we choose where we're gonna, what stage of maturity we're gonna harvest at. And going a little bit younger gives us better quality feed than letting it sit longer. And then storage conditions. Of course, if we store our hay outside, we have a lot of loss, and the loss tends to be very highly digestible nutrients. Forage that's put up well and stored well will maintain its quality and maintain those nutrients that the cow needs. The quality also affects how much that animal can eat. If you think about the rumen as a big fermentation vat, there's only so much space in there. And if we've got lower quality feed, it takes up a lot of space for the amount of nutrients that it provides. And we can actually max out the capacity of that rumen when we're feeding poor quality feed, and the animal simply cannot consume enough feed to get the nutrients that she needs. You know, clearly we don't want to put her in that situation, but it can happen if we're feeding low quality feed and we've got an animal that's got a high nutrient requirement. So we can estimate the intake of beef cows, the hay intake of beef cows, based on their body weight. And it's simply a percent of body weight. If we've got excellent quality feed, a dry cow will eat about 2.7% of her body weight in hay, and a lactating cow will consume about 3% of her body weight. Keep in mind that this is dry matter pounds when you're calculating, and you need to figure that difference in. Poor quality hay, that dry cow may only be able to consume 1.5% of her body weight. And that's simply because of the fill it takes in the rumen. That rumen is only so big. We can't get enough poor feed into that cow to meet her requirements. Same problem with a lactating cow. She'll eat a little bit more, but she won't eat enough to meet her nutrient requirements. We can get a little more specific. The table to the right, or the graph on the right here, is NDF, which is a measure of how much fiber is in that feed. And NDF versus intake, the more NDF we have in the feed, the less that animal is able to consume of that feed. And that usually correlates as well with energy and protein levels. So very critical that we're providing at least good quality feed for these higher nutrient requirement animals. The way we know how much protein and energy is in our feed is by taking a sample. This is a picture of somebody taking a core sample out of a round bale. This is the most accurate way to get a sample, is to take a core sample. Simply grabbing a handful of hay, you tend to lose some of the higher, the more digestible nutrients. So you really need to core down into that bale. If you don't have your own bale coring spear, your local feed mill will have one. Extension agents usually have one, and usually someone would be willing to come out and pull some samples for you. We would then send that sample to the lab, and they would send back a report that gives us, these would be the ones that we're primarily interested in. But I'll show you an example here of a more comprehensive forage analysis. So the one on the left had a moisture of 15% and a dry matter of 84%. So very typical of dry hay. Crude protein, 7.4%. You know, not a great forage sample. I would consider this a lower quality sample. High in fiber, ADF and NDF are measures of fiber, 41 and 64. Lignin is component to the fiber that prevents it from being digested. It's a chemical that's highly linked to fiber and prevent the rumen bacteria from being able to get in and digest that fiber as well. So we want to see a low level of lignin. We'll ignore some of these are not real important to us when we're looking at beef diets. Fat tends to be quite low in forages, so 2% is very normal in a forage. Ash is a measure of minerals, and it's also a measure of dirt contamination. So we can get some samples that are 10 to 12% ash if we've harvested that feed in a way that's pulled a lot of dirt up during the harvest process. And then it gives us a measure of our calcium, phosphorus, macro minerals. And here at the bottom, we've got the TDN, total digestible nutrients, of 56. If we compare these two feeds, the one on the right is a much higher quality feed. It's got 13% protein. So this would be a good quality feed for a lactating animal, a later gestation animal, a growing animal. The fiber numbers are lower. The lignin is actually about the same, but because the fiber is lower, we've got more energy available. Fat will be about the same. Minerals probably won't vary. This one actually has a little more calcium, probably a different fertilization program there. And then this one has more sugars left in it. And that's a function of how it was harvested. It would have been harvested a little younger. When the protein was higher, the sugars were higher. And so the sample on the right, if I were picking which sample would I buy, I would buy this one because it's a better fit, this one being the one on the right, because it's a better fit for my higher nutrient requirement animals. This sample is from Dairyland Laboratories out of, it's a Wisconsin-based lab. There are labs around the country, out on the East Coast. Cumberland Valley is a very popular one. Here in the Midwest, we tend to use Dairyland and Rock River Laboratories. And I'm sure there are labs in the West as well that would be able to provide this kind of nutrient analysis for you. So as we talked before, match the quality to the requirements of your animals. Your best quality to your steers, your lactating cows, and during periods of cold stress. Moderate quality for your growing animals, gestating cows, your bulls, and your milder winters. If you're feeding a mixed group, feed for the animals with the highest nutrient requirements. And this reduced competition is critically important. We need to make sure that there's plenty of feed space available. I'm sure you've all watched, if you've got a mixed group of animals, the big bossy cows will stand around the hay feeder and eat to their heart's content. And that poor little heifer or just weaned calf tries to get in there and push back and push back. And eventually the big cows will go lay down, but they've picked through a lot of the good feed by that point. So if you're going to have a mixed group, make sure that there's plenty of feed space available. That might mean, depending on how you feed, maybe you need 2 hay feeders out in a group of cattle instead of just one. Maybe you need a longer bunk area if you're feeding in a bunk. And be careful about limiting feed. I think with Highlands, most of us just keep feed in front of them. Sometimes people try to limit feed, and while that works well in some situations when you've got groups of animals with similar requirements, the ones that get shorted when you limit feed in a mixed group are the ones that need that feed the most. So now we get into, all right, I know what my nutrient requirements are. I know what the nutrients are in the feed that I have available, the ingredients I'm feeding. What if I had that hay sample that wasn't really good and I have lactating cows that calved in the fall and now we're into the cold of winter? We've got to provide the nutrients that cow needs to meet her requirements. And we do it by providing an ingredient. So if the protein is too low based on my feed sample and my table that says this is what my lactating cow needs, I'm going to need to supplement protein. Because if I don't supplement protein, we're going to be shorting that animal, and she's going to have to pull that protein off her carcass to support her nutrient needs. So some examples of things that we could use, we could feed some soybean meal. Some parts of the country, canola is a good buy. Distillers grains are another source of protein. Brewers grains. Depending on where you are in the country, you'll have different options available here. So we can provide those nutrients fairly directly by supplementing the diet. We can add sugar to that diet, which feeds the rumen microbes, and those rumen microbes in turn provide protein to the cow. Sometimes we can use urea, and a lot of people are scared of urea. Urea is a nitrogen source that the bacteria use, and it can be fed very, very effectively to provide protein to the cow indirectly, because we're feeding the rumen microbes. So don't be afraid. Sometimes, especially with lick tubs, a lot of those will have urea in them. That's good for the cow. Don't be afraid of that. Urea fed in a controlled manner is feeding the rumen bugs, and those rumen bugs are then going to provide high quality protein for the cow. So that's what we can do to manage the protein side of the equation. On the energy side, we've got to provide, if we don't have enough energy, that cow is going to pull fat off her back to support herself, and we're going to see her body condition drop and drop. And as we talked at the very beginning, when that body condition drops, she then doesn't have the nutrients she needs for lactation, so she won't make as much milk. She won't be supporting that growing fetus as effectively, and she may not get pregnant again if she's on a low plane of nutrition. Reproduction is down the chart enough that she may just not cycle and not get bred again. So we need to make sure that she's got enough energy in her diet. And we can do that. We can provide energy for rumen microbes using corn, barley, sugar. And the rumen microbes are going to turn those ingredients into fatty acids via the propionic, acetic, and butyric acids that the cow uses for energy. Or we could provide a bypass fat to that cow. This is done very commonly in dairy diets, not so commonly in beef diets, but there are some supplements that would have some bypass fat that is an energy source that's used directly by the cow. But any of these ways of supplementing energy will benefit that animal. The easiest way for us to know how our program is working, there's the science of feeding, which is looking at those tables and looking at your forage samples. And then there's the art of feeding, which is looking at the cow and figuring out what that cow is telling us. It's a lot harder with Highlands than it is, obviously, these pictures on the right-hand side are Holsteins, but the concepts are the same. But it's much harder in Highlands because all that hair tends to hide some of these changes in body condition until they get really, till they're thinner than what we maybe think they are. So to monitor body condition in a Highland, it's important to look at the animal, of course, but if you can get your hands on that animal, it's really critical, especially in the winter months. Run them through the chute. If they're not animals that you can go out and put your hands on in the pasture, run them through your chute system, get them where you can put a hand on them. And what you want to feel is feel over the hips. I'm going to switch to the next slide here because it shows you some of the things that you want to feel for. We'd like our animals to be somewhere between a 4 and a 6 on a body condition score standpoint. So we don't want to see muscle atrophy, and you'll typically see that down the hind leg is where the muscle will start to atrophy first. We don't want to see more than a slight bump of spine. If the spine is prominent, then our animal is down here in the thin and very thin categories. It's okay to see a few ribs, the outline of ribs. It's not okay to see all of them. The hip and pin bones, the hip being, that's pretty obvious, over the hip. The pins are the pointy part of the cow on a thin animal, the pointy part of a cow on either side of the tailbone. On most of our Highlands, we want to see that nice and rounded. You can put your hand over it. It's going to fill your hand. On a thin animal, that will look more like a point. We don't want our animals to be at that point. We also don't want them to be heavy enough that we're depositing fat in the brisket and the flank if it is a brood cow type animal. Clearly, if we've got a steer, we're needing to reach that point to finish that animal. And we don't want to see fat developing in the udder and around the tail head in our breeding herd. So this table just gives you a few things to look at, but I find I'm sometimes surprised when I do run animals through the chute and put my hands on them. Sometimes they're thinner than I think they are when I just look at them. So I'd encourage you as Highland breeders to get a feel for what that animal is underneath the hair. I'm going to say just a couple things about minerals, primarily because I follow the Facebook posts, and it seems anything that comes up, the horns are flaky, the cow has dandruff, you name it, and somebody's going to say it's a mineral problem. Now, there are times when minerals are a problem, but minerals are not the problem or the solution to most of the things that people say, oh, it's a mineral problem. We do need to provide minerals to our animals, and we need to feed a mineral that's formulated for your area. There are parts of the country where we need to add selenium. There are parts of the country where we do not. Your local feed mill will be able to advise you on what is an appropriate mineral for your part of the country. We want to use a complete mineral. They come in loose form, so dry, loose mineral. With our types of herds, I like the ones that are weatherized. So Purina's version is called Wind and Rain. Other companies, the company I use we call it, it's got a W in the name for weatherized. But these will be loose minerals that are put out free choice in a mineral feeder. Typically, the ones that are common in this part of the country are round tubs about 3 to 4 feet in diameter. Typically, they've got 3 different sections, and they've got a rubber flap over the top. And the cattle go in, lift the flap, and consume the mineral. The flap keeps the rain out, and the weatherized minerals don't cake up quite as badly as some dry mineral. So look for a loose mineral that is weatherized, and your local feed mill will certainly know what you're talking about if you go in and ask for that. Another easy way to get mineral into animals is to use lick tubs. And be aware that there are different types of lick tubs. There are some that are meant to provide energy, and there are some that are meant to provide mineral. So specify that you're looking for a mineral tub, though a lot of times I do feed the energy tubs with mineral as well, because I'm wanting all of it. But if you're simply looking for a mineral tub, let them know that you're looking for a mineral, primarily a mineral tub. And it'll be mineral that's been baked into a great big tub. Usually they're about 225 to 250 pounds. And they're molasses based. Highlands love them. I think all cattle love them, but Highlands will certainly eat those. On On my farm, I tend to use them in the middle of winter when the temperatures are cold to give the rumen microbes a little boost of sugar so the cow gets a little more energy, and it's an easy way to provide mineral. So depending on your situation, you might go with a loose mineral, you might go with a lick tub, but you need a mineral program. And a common misconception is that if I put out a trace mineral salt block, I'm good. I've got my trace minerals and I've got my salt. That is not the case. I wish those things weren't even on the market, because they provide a little bit of trace mineral. They don't provide the calcium and phosphorus, magnesium, potassium that the animal needs. And the amount of trace mineral is also not meeting the requirements. So it's basically a salt block. Salt blocks are great, but salt blocks are not a mineral program. I guess I'll stop at that point and open it up for questions. I haven't seen any come in as I've been talking. Kevin, have you?
Anne, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have a preference between loose minerals or lick tubs, or do you rotate, like do the lick tubs in, say, the fall and winter with the loose in the spring or summer?
Personally, I have loose mineral available all the time, and I add tubs through the winter. So the tubs that I'm using are primarily an energy tub, a supplemental sugar type tub. Loose mineral tends to be a little bit less expensive than feeding it in a tub. It takes a little more management than feeding it in a tub, but I tend to go for the dry, complete free choice mineral.
Okay. And then I have another question, as long as it's
Please.
So we have a cow that was fed really well when she was young, and you probably know who I'm talking about, who was sold and went to a farm where she did not get on a good feeding program.
Okay.
So she came back to us, and now we want very, very thin, very emaciated. We are slowly building her back up because, you know, we want her to be able to be bred. We held her off breeding for this year. We'll look at it more next year. Do you find, or have you heard of, do you think there's a problem with that as far as her milk production later? Missing all those nutrients, missing all that good feed for those couple of years?
How old was she, Jan, when you sold her?
I want to say she was 2.
Okay. By that age, I would not expect a long-term problem because of poor nutrition for a period of time. If she was a calf, yes, you could have a problem with her reproductively and reaching her normal mature size, etc. But an animal that was 2 at the time that she went into a situation that maybe wasn't great for her, I think she'll come back just fine. And I think you're very smart to be bringing her up slowly on feed. You know, we had a similar situation 5 or 6 years ago. I think you ended up with one after we got them back. Mm-hmm. And you can't take an animal that's been essentially starved and put them on full feed. You need to take them up slowly, give the rumen microbes. You know, when you make a feeding change, it takes about 3 weeks for the rumen microbe populations to get back in balance where they're working well together. because there's
Mhm.
lots of different types of bacteria. You know, there's fiber digesters, sugar digesters, ones that use different end products of others. So you've got a whole community there. And when you make a feeding change, you've got to give time for that community to get back in balance.
Mhm.
And with an animal that's been starved to some degree, you've got to bring them up slowly. So I think you're super smart in what you're doing, not asking her to reproduce this first year. It's critical for her to be able to build herself back up.
Yeah,
But I would
that's-
not expect it to affect her being able to breed once she's back in condition.
And do you think she'll be able to produce enough to raise a good calf?
Yep.
That'd be
Yep.
more of a vet question.
No, I
Okay.
think there's no reason that her udder memory system would have been harmed by what you're telling me. So as long as she's consuming enough nutrients, she's built her body back up, and she's on a good nutrition program, her udder should be able to make milk just like it did before, or
Mhm.
should have. I wouldn't
Before, yeah.
be at all. Yeah, I wouldn't be at all concerned about breeding her and her raising a calf.
Good. Okay.
And let me know what happens.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see.
Super.
So, 'cause, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited about that. Okay.
Awesome.
Anybody
Finally
else
got-
have any questions?
Yeah, I finally got back to the screen where I can see people. Does anybody else? Yeah. Anybody else want to ask a question or share an experience or?
There's one that just came in on the chat here. I'll read it for you. Can you list
Okay.
what types of mineral you would recommend? What would you recommend to boost a younger 3-year-old cow with a first-time calf? Seems to be putting all her energy into the calf.
Yeah. Was it mineral? Yeah, I would say mineral, you need a good solid mineral program, a dry, complete mineral, but your concern relates more to energy and protein than it does to the mineral. If she's putting her energy into her calf, she's losing body condition, she needs a little more energy. You could do that through, if you went to the feed mill and asked for 12%, what would they usually call that? Just a 12% grain mix. It'll have some corn, some oats, probably a pellet that's got protein in it, probably have a little bit of molasses in it, depending on what part of the country you're in. That would be one way to supplement her. And anytime you add grain to a diet, if an animal is not accustomed to having some grain in her diet, you want to start with a pound or two, give her a week, add a little more. We're not trying to grain finish an animal, but we do need to provide some supplemental nutrients. So that would be one way to do it. Another way would be to find some really good quality hay for her. And if you can separate her so you know she's getting that good quality hay, that would be another way that might be enough to get some nutrients back on her back. Anybody else want to share their thoughts, their experiences with putting weight on an animal that's working really hard with a calf?
We had one years ago that we could never, she was always a small animal and she would put everything into her calves, and her calves were amazing, but we could never let her into what we consider a good condition.
Mhm.
And maybe that's what we were doing wrong at that point. She was always skinny, but she put everything into that calf. So
Yeah, you gotta like a cow like that on one hand. She's working really hard and she's producing, she's doing what she's supposed to do. But she also needs to be able to recoup that weight
Right.
and get back in condition so she can breed again for next year and raise the next calf.
Yeah, we got some really good calves out of her. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Another question that someone had messaged me the other day, and then I saw it on a Facebook discussion. There were some differing answers, so curious on your thoughts on it. On those really cold days when you see, especially this week in Wisconsin, it was pretty cold, and the animals look like they're cold. Is there something that you would recommend to give them to kind of help them increase their internal temperature? Is a couple pounds of corn better, or some really good grass hay better? Or
it depends on what your feeding program is to begin with. If your animals are getting some grain already, then increasing that a little bit will help them. But if they're not, I'm not a fan of taking animals that are on 100% forage-based diet and adding grain today because it's cold. That just messes up the rumen microbes. So if during these periods when it's really cold, putting out your best quality hay and plenty of it, and then of course having a place they can get out of the wind. Most of our Highlands don't want to go in a barn, and it's probably better that they don't, but having a place they can go get out of the wind, lay down, rest, plenty of water, of course, making sure the water's open. Those would be better, in my opinion, than feeding grain to an animal that's not used to getting grain just because it's cold. My dad used to do that, and now I know better.
Hi, Ann, this is Katie. I have
Katie.
a quick question with some of our young steers specifically. So we had a handful, we've still got a pretty small herd. And so we're feeding them some grain, picked up a few more over Christmas just to feed out with them, that the new ones hadn't been used to getting grain. And so added them in for the first week. Everyone was doing great. And now they kind of even ours that have been having grain for a couple months now, kind of went off their feed. What I guess, is your experience as far as, is it because we added new animals in? Do you give them time? Are there better ways to kind of prevent that down the road? We're not trying to finish them out at this point, so it's not a big deal. We just more want to give them a little something extra through the winter.
So when you say they went off feed, are their intakes are down, or they're completely not eating their?
Intakes are down about half of what they were eating prior.
Okay. And what's manure look like? Is that normal manure, or are they unusually loose?
Yeah, everything else looks normal and they're acting fine. They just have no interest.
Okay. For the new ones, it might just be that their rumen is adapting, and they've hit a point where the rumen's a little bit upset, and it's going to take a little time because they probably suddenly ate grain when they're not used to it. And I wouldn't worry too much about them. Yeah, I guess it's not a situation I would be too concerned about, as long as they're acting normal, manure is normal, behavior, they're normal otherwise. I wouldn't worry too much about them.
Okay.
Would probiotics help that situation at all?
Sure would, if you could get them into them. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good idea, Jen.
I think I saw a question pop up, didn't I, Kevin?
Dennis, do you just want to unmute yourself and ask do you have a question? You just want to unmute it. I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Okay, so we had a first-time cow have her calf, and she put all of her energy into her calf, and her body condition went down. and she took about 3 months to get her body condition back to where we wanted it. But it took her an additional 2 months to cycle because she just wasn't cycling. So she was exposed and not getting birth back. Is there like fertility minerals or specific to help with that cycling?
Just so I don't have parents of the same problem.
Okay, yeah. Having a good mineral program, you know, if you're feeding a decent quality, dry, complete mineral, then your mineral needs are probably covered. There are some, there are differences in minerals. So I like to use one that's called a breeder mineral. And they call it a breeder mineral because it's got some highly available sources of minerals in it. So that might be something to try for her. It sounds like it was an energy issue, that she just wasn't consuming enough. You know, she was meeting her maintenance, she was feeding that calf, but she didn't have enough to cover the reproduction at that point. So getting more energy into her through whether it be grain or high quality forage would probably help her. Let me think for a second if there's anything else to do for repro.
Our co-op gave us roasted soybeans.
Well, a recipe kind of to try to boost.
To mix them together.
Yep.
So what I did was use a 15% multiple grain mix. It had some corn, some barley, wheat. Put the 15% with, and then put half a pound of roasted soybeans to a pound with it. And then also use some fertility mix in there also.
That was.
And then also some Selenium 90 due to our location.
Okay.
And then we usually fed them tubs of that in the fall to try to boost.
Yeah.
But I don't know, is there a better time frame to do that sooner in the summer, let's say, or would a tub do some of them things as well?
A tub, you certainly could use a tub, but it's probably not going to provide enough energy. You know, the tubs, the animals will eat a half pound to a pound, depending on how the tub's formulated. She probably would need more than that. And I'd encourage you, once you do get her bred and next year when she calves, supplement her while she's still got a calf on her in early lactation with some of the grain mix that you're talking about. The roasted beans are a great source of protein. They're also providing some fat for her. So I think the mix that the mill gave you is a very good approach. It just sounds like she got a little behind this year and is struggling now to get caught back up and get her weight back where she needs to be to breed again.
And it doesn't help that she's a bottom cow, so.
Oh yeah, yep.
She's.
If we get her to weigh, it's fine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have a question.
Yeah.
So right now, we have our heifers 6 to 8 months old, weighing between 500 and 600 pounds. We're currently feeding what's a Purina starter grower. Just curious, they're getting a pound a day each right now. Just curious what you'd recommend. Do you gravitate more towards a custom feed, or is there a specific brand and type that you like?
I'll get on a soapbox for a minute with that question. Being smaller producers in a world where farms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we are somewhat limited to what the mill will floor stock for us in most cases. There are a few mills, small local mills around, at least in my part of the country, that will still make a 1-ton batch, but in most cases it's 2-ton or more at a time for a custom mix. So depending on, you know, how many animals you're feeding and what type of feed, custom mixes are often not practical for herds of the size that most of us are. So Purina has good products, but so do most feed companies. I would say in this day and age, most feed companies put out quality feed. And I would go with what your local mill carries. Look at the options they have available, and they may have a mill mix, something that they blend and bag at that location that would be somewhat of a custom. It wouldn't be a branded feed, but would be equally good, just blended locally. And
Okay.
usually those are a little less expensive than something that's manufactured at a central location and shipped into a local feed mill.
Okay. And then how much would you recommend, like, pounds per day per calf? I mean, everyone's different, but just kind of like a general.
Are these heifer calves that are going to be go into
Right.
the herd long term? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, somewhere 1 to 2% of body weight, or 1 to 1.5% of
Okay.
body weight would be the most that I would feed.
Okay.
All the hay that they want.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
And they have pretty good quality hay, so we just wanted to,
Super.
kind of supplement them through the winter and help them.
Yeah.
We do that Purina Wind and Rain supplements that have that pre-choice, but we just wanted to know, like grain wise, what we can feed to kind of help them grow and get the energy they need.
Yeah.
Extra energy.
Yeah, I would aim for probably 1% of body weight, and then just watch, are they growing like you want them? Are they maintaining body condition? If yes, then you're on track. If no, bump them up a little bit. If you feel like, oh, they're getting too heavy,
Mhm.
back them down from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for getting on tonight. Billy, did you unmute on purpose?
Did I what, sorry?
Did you unmute on purpose? Do you have a question, comment, discussion item?
No, I guess I don't know why I unmuted. I've been pushing all the buttons.
Well, it's good to see you, hear your voice.
Yeah. Here's one for you. Roasting the soybeans. What does that do nutritionally to the soybeans that's not there without roasting them?
The roasting the soybean makes the protein, less of the protein get used by the rumen bugs and more of it pass through for the cow.
Okay.
Yep, good question.
Like whole corn and cracked corn.
Corn, it's more of a surface area for those bugs to attach to. Yep. Jeff, I see you have your hand up. Jump in.
Yeah.
Hi, Ann.
Hey.
Hi, Jessica.
All right. So here's the question for you. So if we're running 100% grass-fed diet, and we're going to look at doing what do you call them, the samples of the hay, just to kind of see the
Forage
proteins.
sample.
But in the event that the proteins are lacking, what is a good recommendation for boosting up the protein if we're continuing to try to stay away from grains?
Alfalfa pellets, alfalfa meal, alfalfa cubes. Alfalfa is very high in protein, and it is a forage, 100% forage. So blending.
Turn the expert for the 2 cents.
Sorry, what was that?
That's exactly what we were thinking.
That's what we were hoping you were going to.
Yep. No, alfalfa, and you can get pellets, you can get cubes.
Get that for we get it for our dairy cows, because we have a Jersey and then we have 2 Normandys now. So so we already get that, but we're just seeing that the Highlands over the winter, because we are 100% grass fed, they're just compromised. I mean, they just are. And so they do great during the summer. And we have these beautiful animals, but then all of a sudden, dead of winter in Wisconsin, they're not all the freshness that we want them to. And so we just want to know what we can supplement with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Alfalfa is good protein and it's got decent energy to it, you know, for a forage as well.
And then clarification, because I think we're going to definitely do the maternity ward and split off the steers that we're trying to grow out.
Yep.
Now, I want to clarify what you're saying for winter. You offer not only the free choice minerals, the wind and rain, the weather, wind and rain, which we've done in the past when we got them from you, we did that. But then you are doing an energy tub on top of that is what you'd like to put out there, and also the mineral tub, or just the energy?
Just the energy tub.
Okay.
Just yeah.
Sure, I'm covering
that, you know, that might be something you could think about, whether an energy tub would fit within your forage based program. You know, it's supplementing sugar, which feeds fiber digesting bacteria.
Well, I'm just thinking winter time. I'm just thinking our winter where we're not seeing that. And again, we don't grow our own hay, so we're getting it from somebody else, but we'll obviously have it done. But I just wanted to make sure I was making sure the right tubs that you were using.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Is the hay at your place?
Yes.
I go by within a couple miles of you once a week. Would you like me to swing in and pull a sample for you with my probe?
We'd love to have you.
I'll let you know next time I'm coming across through your town.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ann.
Yep.
Perfect.
Dennis, I think, jump in.
I got another question for you.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's got a mix of Angus, and he decided to try distillery mash.
Yep. Yep.
Where in a program would you add that for Highland cattle? Where would that be appropriate?
That is a good protein source, and it's got decent energy to it as well. So you could feed that right along, you know, with a forage-based program. I mean, it would be a grain source, but a good portion of the grain fraction has been used already. Are you asking like how would you feed it, or just is it?
I don't know. I mean, he ordered it by the ton, and they just backed up and dropped it off. So I was like, how do you'd have to mix that in with something.
Well, they will eat it.
Or?
They will eat it straight usually, but you'd want to limit. You know, put out a certain amount per day. Don't just give them access to the whole, you know, free choice.
Right.
Yeah, they would eat and eat and eat. Yeah. Do you have a feed bunk that you could put it in?
We figure something out, or
yeah.
Better a gravity box, something like that.
I just didn't know. I've never heard of doing that, so I wasn't sure what it did.
It's pretty common in bigger beef herds.
Bigger operations.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then
Very
usually
common
run it
feed.
13 on.
Yeah. A lot of times they do, but some people just put it out in tubs, you know, 55-gallon drums that have been cut long ways to make feeders out of.
We have those.
Yeah, you can make some simple feeders that they could eat it out of.
All right. It was just another option, I guess, I was thinking of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good feed stuff, and generally it's very inexpensive if you're in an area with a brewery or a source for it. You do need to be careful. It's wet, right?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I think it's got some moisture to it. I would assume it would.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of times they're getting it straight from the brewery, or I guess that's what you would call it. And it will be fairly wet. So if it is, you'll need to be careful how much you get in the summer. It's pretty easy to feed in the winter, but in the summer, because it's got so much moisture, it spoils really quickly.
Well, that's good to
So
know.
just a few things to, and you know, feel free to email me if you've got questions once you get some in and are trying it. But
Yeah.
I'm
If
sure
you
they'll
ever
eat it.
come down towards Loganville, you can swing in and take a sample of our hay too.
What's it near?
Just
Also,
outside the
Wisconsin
dells.
Oh, I do a lot of traveling. Send me your phone number. Yeah.